Everybody got one pretty much, almost. All right. Take you up here. The title of our message today is The Glory of Old Glory. This is All-American Sunday, and we are taking a text from Psalm chapter 33 and verse 12. And this is not actually ascribed to David in the most ancient manuscripts, but the Septuagint does ascribe this psalm to David. So, happy is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his very own. We live in the greatest nation that the world has ever known. But let me assure you, there is not anybody that I have ever met that thinks there is more wrong with America than I do. But we live in the greatest nation that the world has ever known. It's a nation that has serious problems, and yet the greatest nation in the history of the world. Sadly today, Christians many times may not be influencers, but they are gripers. Someone needs to restore the glory to Old Glory. William H. Carney joined the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry in March of 1863, was later promoted to sergeant due to his heroism and actions during the Battle of Fort Wagner. He took part in the July 18, 1863 assault on Fort Wagner in Charleston, South Carolina. His actions ultimately earned him the Medal of Honor. When the color guard was killed, Carney retrieved the U.S. flag and marched forward with it despite serious wounds. When the Union troops were forced to retreat under fire, he struggled back across the battlefield despite being shot in both his right arm and his leg, as well as in his chest. Returning to his own lines and turning over the colors to another survivor of the 54th, he said, "Boys, I only did my duty. The old flag never touched the ground." And I think of him when I see people stomping on the American flag. And I think of him when I see people burning the American flag. Or when I see people that disrespect the nation. We live in a land of freedom. It's hard for me to believe, though, that the originators of our country and many of our founding documents believed that their freedom was going to be used as an excuse by many people to be jerks. But many people have given their lives and, as was said, pledged their sacred fortunes for the establishment of this country that has become the greatest in the history of the world. And many of them are pictured on our baptismal here to my right and your left. And some of them are family members. And many of you, perhaps all of you, have had at least someone that you knew that was in the armed forces or that gave their time to serving our country in some way. I want us to think a little about America today and the situation we're in and what we should appreciate and what we should grieve and what we should ultimately cling to as the citizens of heaven. First of all, America is in the midst of a cultural crisis. And we can see this in a couple of different ways, but let me just mention some. Number one, the work ethic in America has declined. Now, I'm not sure exactly what kind of job that you have done. I don't know what you're doing now or what you observe maybe in your place of business. But in years gone by, life was hard, and so people worked hard. Thomas Paine in 1776 said, "What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value." John Quincy Adams, who was our 6th president, said, "Posterity, you will never know how much it cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it." Today, the work ethic in America has declined. Have any of you ever been into or recently, I know you have ever, but you've been recently into a store of any size and tried to find somebody to actually help you with what you needed to do? We're driven today not by goals and ideals, but by the love of individual freedom, which we praise, and yet we understand to have taken us into some areas that we should not occupy. We're sloppy today. A lot of you worked at Walmart at some time. I did for a while. When I worked at Walmart, you had to wear a collared shirt and a tie. I don't wear a tie on Sundays today. But you had to wear you could not have facial hair. And if your hair was long, you had to wear a hairnet. And now, well, it's different. And I'm not saying that all changes in those areas are bad. I'm not saying it. But Walmart started changing when the old man died. And there's no virtue in being old. Believe me, I am learning that. And yet we've seen a drastic change in our lifetimes. We're disrespectful. Many of you were taught to say yes ma'am and yes sir. Apparently that's not being taught today. We're disrespectful. We're argumentative. Now, I'm not saying there ought not to be arguments. Sometimes maybe there should be. Sometimes things need to be contested. But nobody ever accepts even basic truths without argument today. And so you try to tell somebody that they need to be more respectful and talking less sloppy, that type of thing. And what do you get? But. Everybody thinks that they're a New York lawyer and got a case that can confound anybody that says things should be different than they are. In days gone by, a person would take a job at 8 o'clock, and when the boss got there, they'd be waiting in the parking lot. Today, they say, at the interview, can I come in at 8:30? Because everybody's got an excuse. We're sloppy. And if anybody questions it, we got an argument. And we got a cultural crisis. Secondly, America is confused on priorities. I understand that different people prioritize different things in different areas, and I'm not intending to tell anybody what everything should be, how everything should be in their lives, but let me mention some basic things. We're confused on priorities. We're confused on morality. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident, said there has been a loss of the serious moral basis of society. Alan Bloom, in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, said, "Today's university student believes one thing deeply. It has reached the status of an axiom. He is absolutely convinced that truth is relative, and he is astonished if anyone is foolish enough to challenge the point. This relativism is not the product of theological reasoning. It is, so the student believes, a moral postulate of a free society. He has been taught from childhood that the danger of absolutism is not error, but intolerance. Thus, in our democratic society, openness is the highest virtue. The supreme insight is not to think you're right at all." Christians have been cowed by the phrase today, "You cannot legislate morality." Let me say this: every law is a legislation of somebody's morality. And while we cannot give absolutes in every single issue that we may face, the law sets the standard. It's like the curbing on the side of a road. It's like the little indentions on the side of the larger road. When you get off the road, it's something that warns you about danger that could come. The law sets a standard. And wherever you put that standard at, people are going to try it and test it. Now, that doesn't mean that the law is right in every way, but it does set the standard by which we conform. There's not a moral absolute that has anything to do with the speed limit, but the speed limit's there to help us with safety. And if I get pulled over, I don't say, well, there's not a moral absolute, officer. You're aware of that, right? I also don't start crying, and I also don't say I didn't know what it was. I say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it, I apologize. I'm the nicest guy you ever met when talking to a police officer. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Most polite you ever saw. Don't be one of those people that uses getting stopped by a police officer as your opportunity to tell them what you think about law enforcement in Putnam County. You're not getting a break. You're not getting a break if you do. We shouldn't change the laws in America against stealing because millions of people steal. What kind of country would we have? There would be no curb. There would be no standard that's set. And that is a moral issue. And not only if it's over $1,000 or $500. It's a moral thing. Cardinal John O'Connor said, public officials, perhaps more than most other people, are fond of saying they have no right to impose their moral beliefs on others. That's equivalent to saying their obligation is to make value-free judgments. That's nonsense. To make a value-free judgment is to make no judgment at all. And yet, today, people believe that any kind of judgment is an infringement on their rights. Well, I want to be honest. There is a difference between governmental affairs and what we consider to be a Christian lifestyle or things that are done in the church. There is a little bit of a difference there. But let me just put this to your mind. What is your concern? Is your concern what the mayor thinks, or is it what heaven thinks? Is your concern what the Supreme Court says, or what the Supreme God says? What is your concern? We're confused on patriotism. Ronald Reagan said, double, no triple our troubles, and we'd still be better off than any other people on earth. There's not a country in this world that people are clamoring to get into as they are the United States of America. And there's not one that's as easy to get into either. Woodrow Wilson said, a nation which does not remember what it was yesterday does not know what it is today, nor what it is trying to do. We are trying to do a futile thing if we do not know where we came from or what we have been about. And yet Sigmund Freud said, America is a mistake, a great mistake. There's only one nation on this planet that everybody wants to be a part of, and that's this nation. Megan Rapinoe said that she's going to leave America. Elon Musk said, I'll pay your way. But we're confused on patriotism, we're confused on morality, we're confused on culture. I've already said just a bit about that. But a country is defined by borders, language, and culture. In the past, America was looked at as a country that was a blending of cultures. In other words, you might have come from Ireland, and that's your culture, but you're in America, and you came here because you believed in an idea. You believed in a way of doing things. You believed in the ideals that the country was founded on. And you believed in that, so even though you're still Irish, you're over here now, and you're an Irish American. You're part of this. And that same thing applied to everybody, no matter where they came from in the world, no matter what their distinctives might have been. And America benefited from that because they had the input of different people from different places around the world. And now, in our country, America is not like a melting pot, it's like a bowl of marbles. It's a lot of people that are living in the same place, but they're not assimilating to one another. They're trying to maintain these distinctives, and nothing wrong with that up to a certain level, but they don't want to fit in. They don't want to be a part of a unified culture. While the Twin Towers were still smoldering, many people were rushing to understand our enemies. We have to understand why they did this. No, we don't. We have to understand that they did it. And we're told to be sensitive today when encountering terrorism, which ensures future terrorism. Benjamin Netanyahu said, we have to eradicate terrorism the way the great powers eradicated piracy in the 19th century and Nazism in the 20th century. So we're confused on culture. We're confused on emotions. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. How many Christian people, I just don't feel it? That's not what my faith's based on. My faith's not based on my feelings. My faith's based on this. I care, but it don't really matter that much to me what you do. I'm going to live for God with my life. I am. You know, some of you guys read The Lord of the Rings, right? Some of you? I've read it more than all of you combined. J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian. And in his story, telling about Frodo going to Mount Doom to destroy the ring, Frodo said, if no one goes with me, I will go alone. And we used to believe that because we would sing Though no one join me, still I will follow. I'm going to follow all the way. Don't let your emotions run you. How many times do you hear people say, "Oh, I'm not feeling it today"? Well, then go ahead and follow that one into the unemployment line. This world is being run by people that don't feel it. In America, dogs are considered human. In other countries, lunch. We love things that ought not matter. We're sexually confused. We live in a homosexualized, feminized America. If a boyfriend can't be like her girlfriend, she doesn't want him. If he can't paint her nails like her sister, she's offended by him. We used to teach boys to be tough. I know some of you girls are tough too. I'm not taking that away from you. I don't want to tread on your rights, okay? Bible says in the beginning God created them male and female. Male and female, He created them. And He didn't call them person kind, He called them mankind. Both of them are mankind. And I'm out today. And I'm generally pretty good about telling, but sometimes they even confuse me. America needs more religion and less sex. Let me say something about religion. I'm getting a little weary of people saying, "I'm not for religion, I'm for relationship." I'm getting a little tired of that because the Bible talks a lot about religion. It uses that word. That's not a bad word. Okay? It's not. And plenty of people are saying things like, "Well, I'm not that much into the church, but I'm spiritual." The Bible doesn't say be spiritual and don't go to church. It says be part of the church. And when people say things like this that they think sound so intelligent, it's anti-biblical. The Bible teaches religion, which is a system of beliefs, and it teaches the church. It doesn't teach this, "Oh, just be yourself and whatever kind of individual you want to be and exist apart from other believers." That's not what it teaches. If you want to mess yourself up, sex is the way to do it. Instead of handing out condoms and safe sex kits, we ought to be giving out copies of the Constitution and the Ten Commandments. Homosexuality is celebrated today because it's a radical expression of human freedom. The abnormal seeks tolerance, then demands acceptance, and finally argues for government subsidies and the granting of special rights. You see, the kind of world we're living in today is not a world of tolerance. It is a world in which tolerance is not enough, but affirmation is sought. See, there's a difference between saying you have the freedom to do that, and then if you do that, it's just as good as any other choice. And that is what is being sought today. Society is being recreated in a pagan image. We're confused on civil rights. By the way, I'm for civil rights. And if some drastic things had not been done in previous years, there wouldn't be any civil rights in America. But under the guise of civil and human rights, we're being robbed as a society. To compare what is being called civil rights today to real tragedies can be an embarrassment. Logic has been replaced with feelings, and we're afraid to hurt anybody's feelings. Now, in the place that I do my therapy, we have to undergo, the training that you undergo, the one that nobody wants to sit through, everybody has to, that training. We have to undergo it too, and nothing wrong with that. And so there was a man in our group that said we're being taught about sexual tolerance and things like that. And the man in our group, he said with pride, he said, "Well, I've got a rainbow cup on my shelf in my office. That's not the rainbow that God created to say He's not going to destroy the world by water anymore. Not that rainbow, the other rainbow." And so, that everybody's in favor of that, almost. And then a few minutes passed, and a fellow said this. He said, "What about if somebody was a Catholic and they wanted to put a crucifix on the wall? Would you object to that?" We're confused. Stan Cope wrote an afterword to The Tale of Two Cities. The ideology that justified the Paris terror is the phenomenon dear to the revolutionary mind known as collective guilt, in the light of which individual offenses are incidental, unimportant, or even unreal in a truly radical moral scheme. The only meaningful crime is the crime of the social system against those it oppresses and abuses. You see, by this thinking, when there's a mob robbery that you see on TV all the time, right? When there's one of those, now we're going to try to have some kind of justice, but at the same time, you got to understand these people don't have much. You see, the crime is not what they did. The crime is society and having a system that they've not been able to hook into. We're confused on civil rights. We're confused on education. Now let me say something here. I shared this morning with our men's group. And I'm not trying to answer all the questions that have to do with the educational system, and I try to respect the educational system. I was a public school kid, had great experience in public school, and not trying to criticize anything per se. But the public schools today are different than what they were 100 years ago when I was there. But having said that, a lot of what goes on in the school depends on who's on your school board and what part of the country you're in and what the influences are. We lived down in South Florida for a while, pastored a church down there, just a little north of Fort Lauderdale. And there was a woman down there that a pastor in Miami told me about, that they were going to have a new sex education initiative in the school. Well, she was concerned about it, and so she inquired about it and went to the meetings. And when they looked for a committee to work on it, she said, I'll be on the committee. I'll be on it. And they put her on the committee. Ended up, they put her in charge of the thing. Now that's power. Well, but listen, if we don't participate in the society, we're not going to have a voice in the society. And that's not a matter of trying to bend everybody to your will and make everybody see everything the way that you see it. It's a matter of somebody doing something to stand up for righteousness in the society. Science can't replace faith, and it doesn't. But science and faith don't always see eye to eye. Well, I can't be helpful in every area having to do with that, but let me say this. The state of knowledge is always the state of knowledge at the time. There are things that are known to be true medically that today were thought to be untrue in my youth. I read an article one time. You know how these humorous articles from the past, they'll put them out on Facebook or be on the internet somewhere, and I forget the exact brand, but it said 90% of doctors smoke whatever the cigarette was. Well, they know that's foolish today, but they thought it was okay then. And there are things that they believe to be true today that in 30 years they're going to know they're not true. And there's things that they think are untrue today that they're going to find out are actually true. The state of knowledge at the time. I believe the book. I believe the book. I interpret the book in the standard way that you interpret language. The standard way that you interpret language makes a difference between literal and figurative speech, and you can tell by the speech who's telling it, what the context is. Same thing with Scripture. You can tell by the context that Scripture's in, or whether or not it tended to be a literal thing or something that is figurative. You can tell that. You can tell that. You can tell that. And you can know the book if you just read the book. You'll learn it in time. But I believe the book. And so if the book says something that it seems like the scientific community says something different, then I believe the book, and I just say, well, we don't have all the complete evidence scientifically. I don't try to prove the book by science. I don't. It's a book of faith. The Bible says that without faith it's impossible to please God. If you don't have faith, you're not going to prove the Bible scientifically. That's not the way it works. I believe that Jesus died to save my soul, and I'm going to go to heaven. Doesn't matter to me whether they can scientifically verify there's a heaven or not. I believe it because I believe the book. When I was in the 10th grade, in our science class, the science class I was in, we had 2 book reports that were given. People did book reports, and one was on the theory of evolution, and one was on the theory of creation. I was in 10th grade. Creation, the theory of, the biblical account of creation. And the evolutionary paper was presented, and the biblical paper was presented. I did the biblical paper. And Ms. Allen said, okay, now we're done with that. They ain't doing that over here. In the first half of the 20th century, the Germans were the most advanced society on earth scientifically, and they gave us the death camps. We're confused on religion. Religious expression is a part of the fabric of America. Always has been. Freedom of religion always has been. That counts for my belief. That counts for somebody else's belief. It counts for everybody's belief. The thing I'm concerned about is, does America, leaving God out, please the Almighty? Say, well, you can worship whatever you want to worship, I suppose. Does that please the Almighty? Just a few minutes ago, we were studying in Daniel chapter 5, where Daniel came to Belshazzar and he said, You're honoring the gods of wood and stone and desecrating the Almighty. God's not concerned about the temporal laws of mankind. Does it please the Almighty when we live a certain way? Does it please the Almighty when our allegiances go? Listen, and by the way, your political party's not God. I mean, it ought to be pretty obvious today. But your candidate is not the Almighty. The legacy of years is the inheritance of today. The unisex movement, y'all can remember that. I was a kid then, you know. Y'all remember that. The unisex movement confused America. Is it any wonder that there's an epidemic of STDs? On February the 4th, 2002, the American Academy of Pediatrics said that gay couples can raise children as effectively as heterosexual couples, and that's become the Bible for our age. So it's no different if you're married to somebody of the same sex or someone of the opposite gender. There's no difference. It doesn't matter. What the book says. That's not what the book says. And by the way, listen. You'll meet folks that won't agree with the book. They'll be the nicest people you ever met. That doesn't have anything to do with the truth of God's Word. No fault divorce confounded the family. By the way, let me say, things happen. Folks get divorced. My parents got divorced, and but it's tough on the family. It's tough on the family. And I preached the funerals of my mother and my father within the last year. I'd like to, and I know that, you know, a lot of times when there is a divorce, a lot of times it's more one way than the other way. One person didn't want it, wouldn't have pursued it. I understand that. I understand sometimes it's both of them want out. I understand that. I know there's a lot of different things there. But I would, if I could, I would tell people, you know, I don't know if you need to stay together for the kids, but would you at least consider it? Just think about it. Instead of just, you know, well, I just want to do what I want to do. I just don't, you know, she's not as pretty as she used to be. Look at her, you know. But, you know what I'm saying? Just kind of this kind of silly stuff that people. There's a whole lot more to a man than having a 32-inch waist. And there's a whole lot more to a woman than just being a pretty face. I had a woman come in the office and she's breaking up with her fiance. Fiance breaking up. Fiance. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Why'd you break up? He was engaged to another girl. He's engaged to 2 women. I told her, I said, man, that guy didn't want to be engaged to either one of y'all. Y'all putting the heat on him. And so, oh, well, okay. Abortions devastated the nation. I thank God that there are no more abortions than there are. I know a lot of women that are in bad circumstances that are not considered an abortion. I know several people that were born of a one-night stand or even a rape. And I can assure you that those women love those children and they love their mom. And I'm not trying to take away from the severity of that situation. But I am saying that God set the system up a certain way. And yet we perverted that system, and so you end up with children that are not wanted and unions that are not needed. There was a story several years ago of a woman that beat a 5-year-old girl to death, or 5-week-old girl to death. That was her 8th child. She was forced to have a tubal ligation and given 5 years probation and no jail time. Pete Singer, a Princeton bioethicist, said, very often it's not wrong to kill a child once it has left the womb. Simply killing an infant is never equivalent to killing a person. Barbara Boxer said, a baby isn't a baby until you've taken it home from the hospital. What the rot? In 1983, been some time ago, baby doe in Bloomington, Indiana was allowed to starve because it had Down syndrome. The way we treat life says a lot about us. There are more commercials on television about saving animals than there are about saving children. Abortion involves 2 human lives. And I couldn't tell you how many women that I've met over time that deeply regret the decision they made. And it's not my point to sell anybody on a guilt trip. I mean, I believe in forgiveness. The blood of Jesus can cleanse all sins. But what about the aftermath? What about the aftermath that happens to people? Modern medicine treats the unborn as a patient. George Will tells a story of a boy who had 6 brain surgeries 9 weeks before birth. The legal profession treats the unborn as a person. Some of you may remember several years ago, Ray Caruth, who was a former football player for the Carolina Panthers, he attempted to kill his girlfriend who was expecting, got 2 charges of murder, of attempted murder. A woman named Victoria said, in this society we save whales, we save timber wolves, bald eagles, and Coke bottles, yet everyone wanted me to throw away my baby. We have the cultural environment of a human holocaust. The first direct order of euthanasia came from Hitler in 1939. All state institutions were required to report patients ill for 5 years or more and unable to work. Those who decided who should die were generally physicians who had never met the patients. Dr. Leo Alexander, the chief American counsel at the Nuremberg trials, said, whatever proportion these crimes finally assumed, it became evident to all who investigated them that they all started from small beginnings. The beginnings at first were merely a subtle shift in emphasis in the basic attitudes of physicians. There's no such thing as a death with dignity, and if you've ever seen anybody die, you know that. Well, can anything be done? Well, saved people need to start showing up. Senator William Armstrong campaigned in Colorado in 1984. He sponsored the resolution that made 1983 the year of the Bible. He had a TV spot, and it said, is being a U.S. Senator the most important thing in Bill Armstrong's life? No. His relationship with God is. He won 64% of the vote. But he did the commercial before he knew that. Saved folks better start being involved. We need to stop complaining and start doing something. How many Poles, Polish people, how many Poles does it take to turn the world upside down? One, if his name is Lech Walesa. Saved people better recognize who their Lord is. We need to decide who calls the shots. We got to understand that a Christian society is the only one that's worth having. If there ever was a killing without mercy and a death without dignity, it was on Golgotha. And yet, from that killing, what mercy and enhancement of human dignity. Bow our heads and pray.